السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome to another session of the deep dive into Nizam al-Islam written by Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabahani. Inshallah, we have started the chapter 3, the intellectual leadership of Islam, and we will be continuing from this page where it says therefore. So in the previous session, we have discussed the types, the levels of thinking. We mentioned that there is the enlightened thought, the deep thought, and the shallow thought, and we even went on to explain the narrow thought, and we mentioned why it's important to understand and relate these levels of thinking to the conversations in this chapter. Now, we have discussed the patriotic bond, and our discussion continues from that. The Sheikh says, and I read from this paragraph, it says, therefore, the patriotic bond is unsuitable for the following three reasons. Firstly, because it is a low-level bond, which is not good to bind man with man in his quest for revival. Secondly, because it is an emotional bond arising from the survival instinct of defending oneself. Such an emotional bond is liable to change and alteration, so it is not fit to be a permanent bond between human beings. Thirdly, because it is a temporary bond that exists in the case of defense of a threat, but in the state of stability, which is the normal state of man, it does not exist. Therefore, the patriotic bond is not fit to be a bond amongst mankind. If you remember, in the previous session, we mentioned, or rather reminded ourselves that first, quest is every man's quest, meaning every human being wants progress. Okay, revival is every man's quest. That's what I wanted to say. So, and by revival we mean progress and development. And since we have already defined what progress is, and rather what and also revival in the first chapter, we should be able to easily pinpoint why the patriotic bond is unsuitable for revival. There are several reasons, and there are three reasons that it is unsuitable. Any additional point is attached to these three or an extra, but these three are the main reasons that the patriotic bond is not enough. The first is that it is low level in its thinking. And when we are talking about revival, the very definition and essence of revival is to have a higher level of thinking, because we have mentioned a people with low level thinking and wealth will actually not be able to sustain the wealth they have. That is even addressing the fact that we live in a capitalist world where third world countries are being taught that this false idea that economic progress and prosperity means being revived. Hence, we look at countries like Saudi Arabia, and for instance, the country that is in the limelight right now as the World Cup is going on, Qatar, and people look at it and say, oh, this is progress, this is development, this is revival. We wish our country, Nigeria or Pakistan, would look this way. So the low level thinking, meaning that when we say the low level, putting the low levelness, if there is such a word, of the bond in the spotlight here is very important. Why? Because your level of thinking determines the height, the kind of things you'll be able to capture. So if the foundation of your thinking, the foundation of your decision making is low level, how do you expect to address other life issues? How do you expect to address other real life problems? This is why nations that are established on this bond, on this low level bond of patriotism, you find that many aspects of their lives are dictated by other nations. Yes, it is one of the key factors that determines great powers and subordinate countries being of low level thinking, meaning you to have low level to be established on patriotism, to think that progress will come simply because those people are patriotic, meaning simply because the people, the citizens of that nation are attached to that very land. Secondly, because it is an emotional bond arising from the survival instinct, meaning it is temporary, okay? Because if it arises, we have to understand, we mentioned that the instinct is something that is instigated, which means without instigation it's not present. So besides the first point, let's assume that in addition to it being low level and the reasons we mentioned why low level is harmful to a nation, besides it being low level, it is even temporary. Okay, it's temporary, which means even at its low level situation, it can disappear. And that is most of the time, actually, because instability shouldn't be and isn't the normal situation of human societies. And the kind of instability that even triggers the patriotic bond is when there is sense of a foreign invasion of a land. So without that without that invasion, foreign invasion, it disappears. If you look at the Arab nationalists who were actually Arab, who were actually driven by their patriotism that, oh, this is our land, we are Arabs. So the confusion there is that they had a mixture of nationalism and patriotism, because first they were calling for independence. Let the foreigners go, let the foreigners go. Secondly, then nationalism came in, where, okay, we are Arabs, so the independence should be an Arab independence. So in any event, the temporary nature of this bond makes it even worse, because as I mentioned, the first point where we mentioned that it is low level is enough to disqualify it. But the fact that it's even temporary exacerbates its position. Thirdly, because it is a temporary bond that exists in the case of defense of a threat, but in the state of stability, which is the normal state of man, it does not exist. Therefore, the patriotic bond is not fit to be a bond for mankind. So the third point is actually like an expansion of the second point, because the second point mentions that it is an instinct, it is an instinctual bond, which means it can change. And now let's even understand something. Just because it comes from the survival instinct doesn't mean the reaction to that instinct will always manifest the same way. Because when we say in the second point that such an emotional bond here, when we say that such an emotional bond is liable to change and alteration, it does not even necessarily mean that it will be present and absent. That's what the third point is talking about. Rather, your allegiance can change, since your patriotism is attached to a certain land. What if you immigrated to another land? You see, the instability and the lack of permanent and the temporary nature of this bond makes it actually dangerous for a nation, because at the level at which, for instance, people are living in countries like Nigeria and Pakistan, and they are moving to places like the UK and things like that, and they spend so many years there that they even acquire the citizenship there. So if there is a clash between their mother nation, their motherland, and the nation that they are currently living in and benefiting in, where do you expect them to support? You see, it creates a clash between this in this kind of situation, because if the nationalistic fervor, as we will see below, leads, for instance, a Nigerian moves to the UK, and the UK invades the Nigerian, and the UK invades Nigeria. Now, invasion isn't necessarily physical; it can be intellectual, it can be economically, financially indirect, as the world powers are doing now. And this particular Nigerian notices that the UK is doing that. So, which one is he going to support? Is he going to support the UK, benefits from its more advanced economy, or is it his sense uh, of 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 attachment to the Nigerian land that we're at? You see, it creates so much conflict, and the bottom line is that the bottom line here is that it it causes unnecessary confrontation, because confrontation among humans is actually normal. As long as people differ in their views, there will always be clashes and confrontation. So the problem is not the clashes and the confrontation, but the cause of the clash, the cause of the confrontation, the cause of the conflict. That's actually the main problem. And in this case, it is a meaningless clash. Okay? So he said, similarly, I'm reading this paragraph. Similarly, the nationalistic bond is also unsuitable for the following three reasons. Firstly, because it is a tribal bond which is not appropriate to bind man with a man in his quest for revival. Secondly, because it is an emotional bond that arises from the survival instinct, thus resulting in the love for dominance. Thirdly, because it is an inhuman bond, for it causes conflicts among people over dominion. Therefore, it is not suitable to be a bond between human beings. So, just like the patriotic bond, nationalistic bond is unsuitable for revival, to lead revival, for three reasons as well. The first reason is that it is a tribal bond, because it is a tribal bond which is not appropriate to bind man with man in his cause of rival, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created human beings in tribes, meaning they have different languages, they have different colors of skin, even their eyes and their hair differ. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And from his signs are the creations of the heavens and earth, and the differences in your languages, in your tongues. That's al-sinatukum, meaning your languages, wa alwanukum, and your colors. And this color could even apply to the flags that you carry, meaning anything that creates like a grouping. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you with these natural differences. Okay, so in this case, we might not include flags. So, and these differences are the color of your skin, the color of your eyes, the color of your hair, and even the languages you speak, the territories you come from. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He created you this way not to show that you are different, but to show that you are that you are signs that He exists, that it's due to His existence that you people are different. How does that indicate the existence of the Creator? Because there must have been someone that created the world that way, which is why which is why the world finds itself in such a situation where you do not have the same color, and you do not choose the color of your skin. So in this case, the nationalistic bond is established to create differences among people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told to us, وَأَتَسِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, and hold on to the rope of Allah, and do not be divided, and do not be divided. But this is something that will work for the Muslims. What if it was someone that's a non-Muslim, and you're trying to convince him that, okay, nationalism is actually problematic? Trust me, you don't have to go far. Just look at the history of Europe. Okay, nationalism has never united them. Rather, it has caused them to even to attack each other and plot against each other. And mind you, the first nationalistic states were created in 1648 in the Westphalian, or is it 1646 in the Westphalian Treaty in Germany, and the aim was to cease the conflict between the Europeans. Not many years later, not like 2 centuries later, Napoleon Bonaparte happened. He started the invasion of Europe. Not 300 years after Bonaparte, Hitler happened. Okay, Hitler started invading Europe, which is why they actually created the ECC, which turned into the European Union. And even now, they try to invade each other through financial means. But as we mentioned in the previous session, And even now, we have actually mentioned that the patriotic bond makes people, meaning people, in an attachment to their land. We should not limit patriotism to just a country. It can extend to a continent, whereby another nation from another continent comes to invade lands from one continent. For instance, you find that the European Union the Europeans are now sometimes usually united because of the threat that is that the United States pose that the United States poses against them. So you find that Germany, France, and Netherlands and others are united against the United States of America. But it's not because the European Union is actually working, no, but it's because they have no choice but to unite. Yet, despite the threat that is presented by an external power, you find the United Kingdom, which is part of Europe, conniving against its fellow Europeans. Why is that? We will see that in the next page, inshallah. The reason why it betrays its survival instinct, or rather the nationalistic and patriotic bond to support an external power against its fellow Europeans. So that's why we say, despite the fact that this comes from the survival instinct, it is not permanent in nature. And this applies to both patriotism and nationalism. He said, secondly, because it is an emotional bond that arises from the survival instinct, thus resulting in the love for dominance. Just like patriotism, it comes from the survival instinct. And in the case of nationalism, it even causes the love for dominance. But is the love for dominance problematic? Is the love for dominance problematic? Not entirely, but dominance from what aspect? Because the problem, the huge problem and danger of nationalism is that it has the potential to set fire to the whole world. Because one tribe, and whichever way you define tribe, sets out to dominate the whole world, which means it will treat other humans as animals. It will treat other humans as lesser than them, which is what we have seen Adolf Hitler doing, and any other white supremacist and any other person that is racist and tribalistic and nationalistic in nature. We have the examples of Genghis Khan. People that went out to just dominate, rule people, fight people just for the sake of authority, proving that we are the strongest. You know, our tribe is the elite, is the supreme, is the ultimate thing that indicates progress and things like that. So this is why. So that's how it manifests. So when we say the love for dominance, this is what we mean. Because just imagine, had the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam came to show Arab nationalism, the power and the superiority of the Arabs, what do you think would happen? What do you think would have happened? What would have happened would have been chaos, but we saw something totally different, because he was not promoting the power of the Arabs. Although when you carry Islam, when they carried Islam, they carried it with the Arabic language. But because the Arabic language in this case has turned into the language of an aqidah, not a language of a certain tribe of people. Islam completely detached it from the skin or location of a people. We will see all this ahead, inshallah, when we come to when we start discussing the Islamic ideology. Thirdly, because it is an inhuman bond, for it causes conflicts among people over dominion. Just like the patriotic bond, the third point in the patriotic bond explains the second, this one too. It also expands on the nature of dominion. But I repeat again, is it problematic that a certain people dominate other people? Yes, it is, because it shouldn't be a people from a certain tribe or clan or group that are dominating others. It should be an idea that's dominating others. And we will see why an idea dominating over ideas is much more stable for the human race than this. But for now, we should know that if we insist on a certain tribe dominating another tribe, it means a huge population of the world would be eliminated simply because they were not fortunate enough to come from a certain tribe. They were unfortunate to come from a weak tribe or from a weak nation in this case. Because when I say tribe, I'm actually referring to you coming from Nigeria. Nigeria is a tribe. You come from Pakistan. Pakistan is a tribe, and so on. And this is beside the fact that we have even witnessed and are currently consistently seeing the negative effect of nationalism. Just look at what's happening in Qatar. Qatar, the most expensive World Cup was held in Brazil, and they spent $15 billion. Suddenly, Qatar said, hold my beer. In this case, hold my beard. And then they spent $220 billion on a World Cup, while children, their fellow Muslims in Afghanistan, are dying of hunger. In Somalia, are dying of hunger. In Yemen, are dying of hunger. Palestine, we shouldn't even start talking about Palestine because the issues there are too many. But why is it that even the Muslim population, the Ummah, does not really feel that it's problematic for, especially around here, around places here in Nigeria? But alhamdulillah, okay, to say even the Ummah does not feel oppressed by that, it's actually not entirely correct. The Ummah is waking up and realizing the problem of nationalism. But the point is you can see that Qatar, in no way does the current structural apparatus allow for Qatar to suddenly say, okay, the wealth in Qatar belongs to the people in Afghanistan. Why? Why would it be so? They are from different lands, different territories. They speak different languages. You see, this is one of the problems with nationalism. So while they are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on a stupid sport that they will never win, they're actually out of the World Cup right now as we are speaking. Excuse my French. Their fellow Muslims in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in Yemen, in Libya, in Syria, in Palestine, in Kashmir, here even down here in Nigeria, Maiduguri, and other places, they are spending that money on hosting kuffar, filthy people that hate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hate the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, hate our beloved Sahaba, our beloved scholars, our Islamic civilization. And they are busy inviting scholars to give talk and a recitation of the Quran in a stadium, after which a dance lesson was held by a group of lesbians called BTS. This is the problem of nationalism. If you are trying to even write a PhD thesis on the problem of nationalism, just look at the situation that's happening, the current situation. This is not to even mention Saudi Arabia beat the club of Argentina, and suddenly they decided to divide to their players to give to their players Rolls-Royce and Bugattis. While in the first place, they are the ones bombing Yemen, killing innocent civilians. Secondly, those people in Yemen are suffering. But no. The wealth in Saudi Arabia belongs to Saudi Arabia. The wealth in Qatar, according to nationalism, belongs to Qatar. The wealth in Kuwait belongs to Kuwaitis. The wealth in all these things, they belong to them. So you see, when we talk about the problem of nationalism, it is very dangerous. Which is why, although in the level of thinking, it is not as low as patriotism, because patriotism is lower in terms of thinking than nationalism, because it is very temporary, whereas nationalism can actually be permanent. Because that love for dominance can be permanent. When it's strong in an individual, it can be permanent. But nationalism is much more dangerous because it is a tool of chaos. It depends on the level of ambition of the person that carries nationalistic fervor, nationalistic feelings. But it is very dangerous. Which is why you will see that there are pogroms are held against people. When you're reading Nigeria's military history, you'll see that whenever a certain part of the country people from a tribe within the military carry out a coup, they execute people from other tribes. Where is the patriotism in this case? No, nationalism has taken over, which is why it's more dangerous. So if you look at it, both of them are actually quite dangerous and useless to the human race. Now, we have mentioned that countries like the United States of America are revived. They are progressive. Yet, we are saying here that the patriotic and nationalistic bond are not suitable for revival. When those nations that we have declared as revived, like the US and the UK and Germany and France, they are actually proud of their nations. They are patriotic and nationalistic. So isn't there a confusion here? I think this is a question I have asked in the previous session. Well, the difference, please can Suleiman Adamu switch off his camera? Oh, he just left the meeting. Okay. Now, the problem with this, now the thing is, yes, the United States, people in the United States and places like Britain, they have the patriotic bond and they have the nationalistic bond. But we need to understand an important point. Their nations, these nations are not established on patriotism or nationalism. Patriotism is just a tool that plays a role in a certain aspect of their lives, as well as nationalism. But the foundations of their nations are the values that they derive from their aqaid, from their creeds, which is secularism. Their nations are established on secularism, as we will discuss in the next session, inshallah. So, okay, I think we can actually discuss okay. So the problem is, I apologize, today's session will be very short because I don't have power and my battery is quite low and my computer can go off at any moment. So, and I don't want that to happen without us closing. So if anyone has any question, can you quickly ask your question so that we can answer it as much as we can before my PC goes off, inshallah. Does anyone have any question? If there are no questions, then we can close, inshallah. We can end the session.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, ya Ustaz.
So Sheikh, this bond, and so if a nation that is also his level of thinking is also high, like some of the ideological states, they also express patriotic bonding.
Yeah.
And so does it affect them in any way compared to those, unlike the other states that have also low thinking, but they're not ideological? Take for instance Nigeria. In comparison,
yes,
what effect does the patriotic bond that countries like US have?
Yes. So yes, as the patriotic bond or the nationalistic bonds are much more harmful to countries that do not have a high level of thinking, meaning countries that are not ideological in thinking, because those countries actually shallowly depend on patriotism and nationalism. So for instance, in Nigeria, you will hear people saying, oh, our leaders are not patriotic, that's why they are not fixing our nation. So if they were patriotic, they would have fixed our nation and ignored their own self-interest. Whereas in countries like the US, you will hear people saying it's because of our leaders' patriotism that they have fixed our nation. But the truth is, patriotism and nationalism are much more harmful to countries with low-level thinking. And in countries that have a higher level of thinking, they are safeguarded by their high-level thinking, meaning their ideology, whereby they find solutions from this ideology. Because countries that depend on patriotism and deceive their people into thinking that it's patriotism that will fix their nation do not allow the production of a system. Because if you depend on nationalism or patriotism, how would you solve the economic problems that you have, the social problems? How does patriotism provide the solution to your economic problems or to your social system problems or to your ruling system problems? So you see, that's why in places like Nigeria, it is hard to discuss about systems. When you're discussing the economic problem, it is hard to turn people's head into discussing it from a systemic angle. They are always discussing how Buhari has failed them, how good luck failed them, how Obasanjo failed them, and how the next president will inevitably fail them. They are not discussing the causes of the problem. You see, that's a huge harm. That's very harmful to the nation, because now the nation will never be able to progress until it realizes that its problem is not of patriotism or even nationalism. So you find out, just the way Nigerians will be saying our leaders are not patriotic, at the same time, the tribes within Nigeria are plotting against each other. The Hausas are plotting against the others. The Yorubas are plotting against the others. The Igbos are plotting against the others. While all this is happening, the smaller tribes are plotting against the three major tribes. How will a nation like this progress? When the whole nation is trying to kill each other, when all the citizens are trying to kill each other, they are trying to eliminate each other. So you see the huge harm it has on countries that depend on those bonds. Now, do these bonds have negative effects on ideological countries? Yes, they do. It does. Yes, it does. But not at the level that it has on countries like Nigeria. That if you look at the Europe, for instance, you can see the negative effect of nationalism. You can even see the negative effect of patriotism. Patriotism, meaning their desire to defend Europe, united has united Germany and France to establish and safeguard the European Union. But it has not convinced Britain into joining Germany and France into defending the European Union against Russia and the United States of America. Rather, Britain has succumbed to nationalism. So the problem is, the capitalist system has nationalism and patriotism. The closer the closer you look at it, the more you notice that patriotism and nationalism are actually contradictory to each other. They do not compensate each other, because whenever they come into clash, one betrays the other and it causes huge damage. If you look at the Chinese state before it was united, you ever wonder how is it that a small island of like Japan conquered parts of China? The way it managed to do it is because the Chinese people are very nationalistic, meaning they are very tribal. It is a family state. They were always fighting each other. So, but if there was patriotism, you would think when a foreigner comes to conquer a part of China, they will unite and fend that enemy, right? No. Instead, the states within China, some of them would ally with foreigners in order to defeat their own enemies. So that's why I said patriotism and nationalism are actually contradictory to each other, because they are things that are very fundamental, that come from the basiest of nature. You find it in animals and in birds, whereas humans are able to think, which means succumbing to this very basic nature, and this is a nice way of saying barbaric nature. It's actually against human capability, because man has the ability to act at a higher level than just his nationalistic bond, meaning his desire and attachment to a land. Which is why you find Muslims in the past, for instance, travel and even live their motherland. Some of them would live Medina, like Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh, and he moved to Kufa and things like that, because the attachment is not to the land but to the idea. So in the case of the ideological nations, and this is the problem with the man-made systems, it creates internal contradictions. As much as they are ideological, it also causes problem that they have. There is a problem that they face of patriotism and nationalism, which is the self-contradiction of the system. So yes, as much as they are ideological, it has a certain flair of harm that it comes with even for them. I hope this answers the question clearly. Sorry, I'm a bit fast trying to explain as fast as I can without so that we can cover more. So I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, it did. Thanks. Yes.
Yeah. Any other question, please? So inshallah, so if there is no question, jazakumullahu bi khairin for joining. I mean, inshallah, we will meet next week.
أمة واحدة دولة واحدة